Media and Moral Panic, a presentation collated for EDB003, Teaching and Learning Studies 3, Practising Education. Presented by Brendan Andrews, Teresa DeG, Renae Giannaros, Laura Thompson, and Hayley Kellaway. Media and Moral Panic. The sections of our presentation today will be presented by an analysis of moral panic, research by Renae, voiceover by Laura, current effect on Australian teachers, presented by Laura, decoding the media, presented by Brendan, and future implications for teachers, concluded by Teresa. What is moral panic? Moral panic is defined by an episode that is often triggered by alarming media stories. Moral panic is misdirected public concern, anxiety, fear, or anger over a perceived threat to social order. Today's society is subject to periods of moral panic by a conditioned episode, person, or group who become a threat to the values and interests of society. Effects on educators in Australia. The way the media and moral panics directly affect educators within Australia is quite alarming, and recently we are seeing the implications of such panics directly influence the government's education policies. An interesting article in The Guardian newspaper, posted quite recently on the 5th of August 2015, states within the first paragraph that the stagnating literacy and numeracy skills of Australian primary school students should serve as a wake-up call. The article explains how NAPLAN results showed there was no improvement in numeracy, spelling, or grammar and punctuation on the 2014 results in any year group, while the writing skills of Year 7 and 9 had seen a statistically significant decrease from 2011. In Queensland, the NAPLAN results have improved in 16 of the 20 tests in 2015, but children in the state are still lagging behind the national average in every year level. The Queensland Education Minister, Kate Jones, said the state was at the bottom of the heap when NAPLAN testing began 8 years ago, but additional funding, the introduction of the prep year, and moving Year 7 into high school had helped boost performances. However, the Federal Education Minister, Christopher Pyne, said for results to lift across Australia, the focus needed to turn to the Coalition's 4 pillars of education: curriculum, teacher quality, parental engagement, and school autonomy. What Christopher Pyne is referring to as teacher quality is the topic of another interesting article, which promoted a moral panic, causing enough motion within the Australian government to release the Teacher Education Ministerial Advisory Group report. Now, this report addresses significant public concern that theory-laden university education degrees are failing to prepare graduates for careers in the classroom. This article, which appeared in our news about 7 months ago, states that all universities and colleges will now be given provisional course accreditation only, and will have to prove their graduates are competent teachers before full accreditation is awarded. Those institutions producing substandard teachers will be monitored, and degrees could be determined to be unsatisfactory, with their graduates unable to attain their teaching accreditation. The report states it is clear that there is a significant public concern over the quality of initial teacher education in Australia, and the advisory group is convinced that the need to implement change to lift the quality of initial teacher education in Australia is urgent. Mr. Pine conceded the report set high expectations for Australian universities, but he said the recommendations could significantly help improve teacher quality and arrest Australia's slide down international rankings. The report raised what was seen as serious concerns about the ability of graduates to teach literacy and numeracy, causing the government to confirm it will now require all would-be teachers to pass a new literacy and numeracy competency test by 2016 before they graduate. Right now, for us as pre-service teachers, nearing the end of our study, and as a direct implication of that moral panic widespread by the media, we will be one of the first cohorts to have to succumb to these new rules and regulations before we are allowed to gain our teacher registration.
Teachers, media, and moral panics. Teachers are under more scrutiny and pressure than ever before. Constant interference from politicians and stakeholders on educational issues is leaving many teachers feeling as if they are constantly under attack. Moral panics thrive on the kind of visceral emotion that is stirred up when the topic moves to people's children and their futures. The mass media plays a major role in moral panic episodes. They can both start a moral panic and engineer the rapid development of a grassroots episode. And in our modern world of blogs and social media, they have an even larger effect because they are able to capture grassroots sympathy on a subject and then put it out to a wider audience. The media thrives on the debate and emotions brought out in a moral panic. It piques public interest and delivers text receivers. Highly emotive stories bring in readers, viewers, and listeners. What is more heart-pulling than the talk of children's futures? Is the doom and gloom talk a massive storm in a teacup? Does the media accurately report on all facets and facts? Or is the relationship between media and moral panic becoming ever more tight-knit and cosy? So there are 5 things you look at when decoding the media. The first one is genre. So the genre is the variety or form of news. They each have their own rules and features. For example, breakfast television has different rules and features to the editorial in a broadsheet newspaper. The way they construct and deliver their news is going to be different, and the way they package the news for their selected audience is going to be different. We also have news selection. Even in a world of 24-hour news channels and websites that seem to be updated around the clock, absolutely everything can't be covered. Now, this means that even in a single story, there can be parts of the story that aren't covered. There can be people that are close to the story that aren't spoken to. There could be some facts of a story that aren't developed further, aren't pursued, aren't interrogated about. Then we have news values. So these determine if the story is newsworthy. Obviously, newsworthiness, most medias are business. Besides publicly funded media broadcasters, most newspapers, blogs, YouTube news, it's all about getting viewers in to raise capital. So obviously they want news which is going to bring in the maximum number of text receivers, the maximum number of consumers. Editorializing and bias. Totally objective news is a myth, and all media outlets can display bias and can demonstrate politically aligned editorials and content. Now, as I said before, this doesn't necessarily mean writing completely false or deliberately misleading articles. The media can publish articles in which they choose to not speak to particularly a person about their viewpoint, which could be the opposite side. They may choose to only run selected items of what that person said. They can change, by chopping and changing the quotations they use, they can change the context of what the person was saying. They can change the context in which it appears their comments were made. This is all about building. It's all about building their readers into a room where they're viewing the things that they're being presented with in the way the newspaper wants them to see them. You can see down here we've got old Lord Rupert. There's been a lot of debate, obviously, the past couple of years in Australia about the power that single people wield because of the market structure of our media. Rupert Murdoch owns about 70% of newspapers in Australia, or News Corporation does, which he's the chairman of. And obviously, when you look at, for example, Brisbane, our only metropolitan paper is a News Limited paper. There's no other daily printed newspaper to offer a different view or the reverse view. Finally, news discourse. Language and the content of its use is never neutral. The news media is no exception. Editors and sub-editors know what picture they are painting when they choose to use certain language. Reporters and editorial writers know the kind of reaction they're going to get from their readers when they present it in a particular way. Television personalities know the kind of reaction they're going to get from the viewers when they present, react, or overreact to a certain subject matter. The news medium is a business. As any business, it is subject to market forces. The demand for its content is what affects the standing with prospective text viewers and receivers, as well as with shareholders, management, and society at large. The second implication is that as a big business, the news media is owned by powerful corporations run by powerful individuals. Hello, Rupert. Such individuals have their own agendas and affiliations, beliefs and causes, and by definition, they have the ability to influence the popular opinion of the general public in a way that many cannot. A story that is chosen to be picked up and run on the first page of the Courier Mail, if I have a problem with that story or I feel I've been falsely represented, I do not have a way to fight back against a circulation in the hundreds of thousands. So I thought I'd talk now more about why items are deemed newsworthy. News items are deemed to be newsworthy because they contain specific elements. These elements are known as news values, and they influence the position of the text receiver and outline the way in which the subject matter will be absorbed. Generally speaking, news items are highly prized if they conform to either negativity, simplicity, conflict, or human interest. Negativity. Bad news sells. The rosy optimism will lose out every time to the fear of destruction. People don't want to hear about how good things are. People want to feel like their complaints are being listened to and they have an outlet for their anger and frustration. Simplicity. Good news material is delivered easily. Complex ideas are cut down into manageable and deliverable chunks. This can mean that not all sides of an argument are covered. This can mean that everyone associated with an issue doesn't get their say in that particular piece. Even if a TV station might do a two-part story on a current affairs issue, if the first viewing takes in 1 million viewers and the second viewing only takes in 750,000 viewers, then the people that are on the second episode are disadvantaged compared to people on the first episode. They haven't had the same way to present their ideas to a large audience. They haven't had the same way to frame their argument because they're speaking second. They've not only got to say what they wanted to say, they've got to try and respond to what's already been said. Conflict. So this is really a combination of negativity and simplicity. Why depict the subtle nuances of a debate when you can characterize it as a battle of good and evil? There's got to be a baddie. Like a lot of things in the world, it's become black and white. He who is not with me is against me. And human interest. One of the most effective ways of driving home a story is to link it to the lives of individuals. How do these match up to the 5 indicators of moral panic that you've already heard about? Moral panics and the Australian curriculum. Okay, so I thought we'll have a bit of a case study into moral panics in the Australian media. And anyone that reads any newspaper, watches any TV news program, you all would have seen articles, programs, editorials that attack the standard of Australian schools, the achievement of Australian students in Australian schools, both as a reflection against international competition and in things like NAPLAN. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go through what this article is about. So the important things to note on this article are that it's a special report in the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph is a daily Sydney newspaper, and it's often said to have a right wing or a conservative agenda. And then we'll see the headline: Australian schools are becoming too kumbaya with progressive new age fads. And I think you'd all agree that is a pretty intimidating and conflict-seeking headline. Words like kumbaya have a very negative connotation in our modern society. Progressive here is clearly used in a context which is a context which paints the word in a negative light, and it goes hand in hand with new age fads. Now, fads, of course, you know what a fad is. It's something it's here today, it's going to be gone tomorrow. It's of little substance. There's nothing to show that it works. There's no research into how it works. There's no research into the expected results. It's seen as wishy-washy. It's not to be trusted. It's new age. It's out there. It's the kind of thing you find at the Nimbin markets. So Australian schools are becoming too kumbaya with progressive New Age fads. The chairman of the National Curriculum Review slam New Age fads in learning. Academic claims Asian students are surging ahead due to the culture of reverence for their teachers. More than 80 teachers in New South Wales state schools sent to remedial classes this year due to incompetence. Figures show a number of state school teachers were sacked for misconduct or failing programs. The two chairs of the government's review into the national curriculum fear our schools are becoming too kumbaya and overrun with progressive New Age fads that are hurting our children. Australia is sliding behind a number of countries in education standards, including Singapore, South Korea, Finland, and Hong Kong. A development which Professor Ken Wiltshire and Dr. Kevin Donnelly's report blames on the fact students have been handed autonomy in the classroom and that wishy-washy ideals like child-guided learning and collaborative negotiated goal setting are overtaking the traditional model of teachers imparting knowledge. Now, I've put in red some of the language which is very, very confronting, very controversial, and has an intention to paint a picture to the reader that the Australian schools are no good. You know, it's a hippie drum circle filled with New Age fads. They slam the New Age fads in learning. More than 80 teachers in New South Wales were sent to remedial classes last year due to incompetence. What is going on? That these things that they're doing in schools are hurting our children. Now, all parents want the best for their children. They want their children to have it better than what they had. You know, their kids aren't going to be able to achieve and reach their potential in these subpar schools staffed with subpar teachers. And in an increasing globalized world, how are they going to compete in the new globalized economy when they're already falling behind Singapore, South Korea, Finland, and Hong Kong? So you can see immediately this article is framed in a very attacking fashion. It's attacking Australian schools as a whole. It's attacking teachers. It's attacking the people that put the national curriculum in place in the first place. And it's saying that in order for things to get better, we need to get rid of all these things. There's so many things that need to be changed because the current model is not working at all. It's so bad, in fact, that it's hurting our children. All right, so choice of language is a clear tool. The way the media, mass media, is used in constructing a moral panic. Language is often hostile, argumentative, cherry-picked, unnecessarily verbose, or plain offensive. The facts can either be distorted, skewed, or even completely made up. There is no right of reply from the person or persons being attacked. This news article is atypical of the media's attack on the education sector and schools in particular. So we will start by discussing the language used in the article. Now, I've already outlined on the previous slide a couple of offensive terms, or terms that they're meant to bring offence. They're meant to bring anger. They're meant to bring hostility. They're meant to stir up people's emotions. They want to get them hyped up. Now, if you read the remainder of the article, which can be found on the Daily Telegraph website, words such as Marxist, green left, and socialist are used. Now, no one would argue, perhaps except for people that do identify as a Marxist, which would be a very small minority of teachers, no one else could think that being labelled a Marxist is a compliment. Using words like Marxist and green left, they're trying to push the people involved in the education system to the fringes. It's all part of their discourse to paint the current education system as being run on the fringe. They're not interested in the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're more engaged in and worried about imparting social justice warrior hype to your children. Donnelly has written many articles where the curriculum is described as bloated, the teacher quality as appalling, and has described education as being invaded and corrupted by hordes of Kool-Aid drinking left-wing Marxist radicals. So Kevin Donnelly is one of the chairs of the review into the national curriculum. So he wrote the report which the article is based on. And here I've got appalling. He said he's got this in an editorial that was published in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2014, and bloated. That was after the review had been instigated by the current federal government, but it had not yet passed its findings into public record. That in the Australian in 2013, he used words like invaded, corrupted, hordes, and Kool-Aid drinking left-wing Marxist radicals to debate Australia's NAPLAN results as a whole and as a international yardstick that said that we're falling further and further behind. Our kids are being failed by their teachers. Our kids are being failed by the education system, and the education system isn't willing and able to fix itself because it's more concerned with these left-wing ideas. Alright, so the facts and the figures presented in the article paint the bleakest story possible. They talk about how many teachers have been found to be mediocre and not up to it. They talk about teachers having to be sacked because they're simply so poor or for behavioural problems. The lack of intuitive analysis of available information that characterise moral panics is why Stanley Cohen labelled them modern folk devils. It sounds like you're reading a fairy tale. You read this article, you expect the next teacher you see to have cloven hooves for feet and horns growing out of their temples, carrying a trident, a pitchfork, with a tail, and loving the hot weather. Almost all education statistics should be treated with suspicion. Their significance depends on what is being measured, and this is never quite what it seems. The article doesn't go into what they're comparing their statistics to. It doesn't talk about whether or not any other nations were involved besides the ones that we're falling further behind. It doesn't talk about how many teachers are doing a good job. It doesn't talk about how many teachers are receiving accolades for their work in the classroom. It doesn't talk about the percentage of teachers that are pursuing higher education to further improve their career and improve their classroom manner, subject knowledge, and student participation. For example, if we go back to the claim about the teachers being sacked, how many registered teachers are there in New South Wales? Well, conservative numbers put that at around 35,000 full-time teachers in over 2,500 state schools. So Donnelly's figures on sacked teachers indicate a statistical range of less than 1% of registered full-time teachers. So why we can never be happy about any teachers not meeting the standard, you can't expect every teacher to be perfect. It's not going to happen. But you can't allow these kind of outlandish statements to be made without any backup. This is why, together with the language, that this article could be classified as starting a moral panic. So, as I said, whilst improvement is always possible, just how bad is the current Australian education system? If you read this article, you'd think they should, shut all the schools on Friday, sack every teacher, hire a completely new staff, and just start from scratch again, start from year zero, year dot on Monday. The healthcare system is often the basis of debate and conjecture on its performance. Where is the catch cry for the mass sacking of doctors? I mean, we're currently in what is described as an economic downturn. Well, do we get rid of every economist working in Treasury because they're clearly not doing their job? Should they be in line for mass re-education? I mean, I'm sure it's not lost on all of you. I can't help but see the irony. In labelling teachers as Marxist and left-wing radicals, and they're then talking about placing people in re-education camps. Sounds very Stalinist to me. So let's have a look at some figures. Most efficient education systems. So you can see here, we've got the PISA rank for maths. Now, you can see here, Australia did better than countries like Sweden, Iceland, did better than New Zealand, it did better than the Czech Republic, and it did better than Hungary. Now, this is, as I said, for maths, which on the PISA ranking is Australia's worst subject. But what this doesn't say, or this also says, is you can see Finland at the top. You can see Korea, Japan. But what isn't mentioned is that whilst the article goes into talk about Asian students having a reverence for teachers, and it's the teachers' fault for losing control of the classroom, they've allowed themselves to go to the side and not be up the front. They're not engaging in traditional teacher instruction to impart knowledge on their students. That's what the focus of the article, one of the focuses of the article was for improvement. Why not focus on the things Finland does differently? In Finland, teachers are held in the same esteem as doctors. They're paid almost the same as a doctor. All public school teachers in Finland are funded to and are expected to pursue a master's qualification, or at least encouraged to pursue in some form of higher study. Now, why isn't this mentioned in the article? Because it doesn't fit the argument that is being framed, the moral panic argument that's being framed. In the past, Kevin Donnelly has tied the decline of teacher quality as being the reason behind massive spikes in poor literacy. He went on to say that by 2025, we will have a nation of illiterates. Donnelly has stated that our poor schools are wreaking havoc on the tertiary system as they produce school leavers that can't cut the mustard at university. In the article, Donnelly is mentioned as co-chair of the Curriculum Review Board, which he is. He's the co-chair of the review into the National Curriculum. He's also described as a professor, which he is, and a specialist educator with over 20 years' experience in the classroom. However, it does not mention that he has in the past been critical of school-based no smoking campaigns while working on a competitive campaign funded by the tobacco giant Philip Morris. It does not mention his work as a staff member of Liberal MP Kevin Andrews, and of course it's the Liberal National Government which is behind the inquiry into the national curriculum. It also doesn't go into Donnelly's association with US-based education think tanks which call for the end of needs-based funding. He was also a key proponent of the educational culture wars of the 90s. So basically there he was saying that the education system is out of touch, it's out of whack, it's staffed by left-wing loonies. Now, the problem with what has been written in the article, and which I've tried to show by showing some of Donnelly's past form, is you firstly see he's got more form than Farlap in regards to criticising the educational system, the standard of Australian schools, and the standard of Australian teachers. None of this is mentioned in the article. In the article, it merely talks about a professor and specialist educator who has found these problems with the Australian curriculum. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not issues that need to be addressed. However, how do you have a bipartisan debate? How do you construct a proper news story when you're simply taking the words of one person who has a clear history of being anti the current setup in the education system? Some of my biggest problems with some of these articles that Donnelly has written, and you can find many of Kevin Donnelly's articles either on the ABC website or on various news media websites or on various news blogs. My biggest problem is that he doesn't take into account the layman definition of words, such as literacy. When he says that we've had massive spikes in poor literacy, to the average Australian, that means that by 2025, we're going to have a nation of illiterates. We're going to have people that can't read, can't write, can't sign their name. Now, that isn't actually what Donnelly said in the article when he talks about massive spikes in poor literacy. However, he knows what the layman thinks when he hears the term illiterate. When a layman hears the term illiterate, he doesn't mean about someone that doesn't know about modes and tenor and roles and relationships, and he doesn't, can dissect different ranges of text. When the layman hears the term literacy, he thinks reading, writing, and saying and writing, signing your name. He also doesn't discuss the diverse makeup of many schools, universities, and colleges in modern Australia, or the measurable peer-reviewed data that highlights 1, the tie between economic disadvantage and the lack of scholastic success, and 2, the major consensus on both the independent and government-funded sectors for needs-based education funding. The Gonski review highlighted the direct relationship between many factors addressed under the review, including socio-economic disadvantage, isolation, parental educational achievement, and the English proficiency of parents. So whilst Donnelly is trying to construct an argument that changes Gonski and what the Gonski review delivered in terms of streamlining the national curriculum, having cross-cultural curriculum priorities such as engagement with Asia and engagement with the traditions and culture of Torres Strait and Aboriginal Islander peoples, he hasn't addressed that. Well, he hasn't addressed that in the article. Now, to sum up, I thought that we would look at the table which actually depicts the full rankings of the top 30 in reading, maths, and science. Now you can see here that Australia is 9th in reading, 15th in maths, and 10th in science. Now, while you might be flippant and say, "Oh, we were beaten by Estonia, we were beaten by Liechtenstein," important things to remember are that even though we did finish behind Korea, Finland, and Hong Kong, as the article talks about, it doesn't talk about us finishing ahead of countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Estonia, the United States, or the UK. And you can see here that the UK is circled. So they finished 25th, 28th and 16th. And this graph in the middle shows the dropping of the standards maintained and achieved by British school students. Now, if you read that article and I didn't talk about, and you removed the country that they were talking about, would you think they were talking about the Australian education system or the education system in the UK? If you knew the results of both countries, you've got Australia 9th, 15th and 10th, and you've got the UK 25th, 28th and 16th, you would assume the article is talking about the United Kingdom. But the article is an example of moral panics. It's an example of a moral panic directed at the educational system. It's an example of a moral panic directed at teachers and educators. All right, so in summary, I thought I would talk about the future implications that moral panics can have on teachers and on the educational sector. So the future implications for teachers are varied, destructive and harsh, if unchecked and unverified debate is allowed to rage about school issues. If moral panics continue to be developed about education, we will see less collaboration in the classroom, and teaching is of course a collaborative profession. All the English teachers would compare resources and notes. They'd talk about how they're going to structure their lessons. They'd all design, or they'd have at least some input in designing the curriculum, or the head of the department, when designing the curriculum, would ask for some input from some of the teachers. So less collaboration has been shown to lead to fewer resources and poorer quality resources. And how are kids going to achieve when they've got poor resources? You can't make the education system better by giving it a smaller toolkit. Okay, so moral panics in the education system also undercuts the profession by allowing unchecked input from those outside of schools, many without a background in education. This leads to a trust disconnect between the public, and parents are part of the public, and teachers. Trust between teachers, school administrators, and parents is paramount for successful learning and improved outcomes for all students across a diversified range of needs, abilities, and resources. So, if we allow moral panics about education to be freely allowed and just freely unchallenged in the society, then all we're doing is making our own job even harder. It's already very difficult to get some parents to engage in the learning life of their child. How much more difficult is it going to be when they're reading articles that portray you as a Marxist, left-wing, kumbaya, sitting in your drum circle, we're all happy, happy, joy, love and feelings forever. It's just going to make it untenable. Too much bureaucracy can become cumbersome and overburden institutions with narrowed and set instructions and methods, which can quickly become irrelevant and out of date, but remain difficult to change. So by having a less broad curriculum, you make it harder for individual teachers to bring different technology into the classroom because they don't have a broad curriculum to work from. They've got to work to a narrow curriculum, and the narrow curriculum might not allow them to, take a couple of lessons off track to show kids how to develop a podcast, show kids how to publish a blog. And in our modern world, where it seems there's new technology coming out, every year that is, something that's going to be around for a long time and also going to influence the future job prospects, then it seems completely absurd that you would allow the methods and the availability of technology and for teachers the freedom of teachers to implement it as they want into the curriculum. So the narrowing of the curriculum can be viewed as a slippery slope in which it is counterintuitive to developments in new teaching and learning strategies, the implementation of new technologies, as well as playing a role in teacher burnout and dissatisfaction with the profession. So basically, in summary, moral panics in education, if you bring home one thing from this, it's that moral panics in education help underline the trust in teachers. Underlining the trust in teachers obviously leads to a disconnect with parents. It makes it hard to get the parents to engage in their kids' learning. It makes it more difficult to fight government control of things like curriculum, school funding. It makes it more difficult for teachers to do their job.
Moral panic, looking ahead. As we can see, moral panics are often triggered by alarming media stories. They misdirect and mislead the public, giving concern and anxiety, especially amongst children who are naive, young and uninformed. Moral panic often has the tendency to exaggerate statistics and the truth, causing alarm in both society and the way that we see our day-to-day lives. The media is the single most important part of the ideological state apparatus and is used to promote the notion, the idea that society shares basic values and norms.
More research is critically needed to form a balance between theoretical development and empirical investigation. By now, we understand that the media portrays information in a biased way. It is here that we realise that it may be compromised by the knowledge and perceptions of specific events. The 5 crucial elements of moral panic leave us as educators, students, and the general public questioning why moral panic matters to them. Our priorities lie within educating children. Why does this information that is portrayed through the media impact on how teachers support children, and how will it help a child reach their full potential? Why is it that teachers are under more scrutiny? We should all have a basic level of media literacy when it comes to the representation of issues in the media. As future educators, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and our students to be more critically literate. Future educators have a responsibility to educate ourselves and our students with the necessary information to succeed in life, without being subjected to inappropriate scaffolding or of irrelevant topics and discussions. Are we supporting parents when concerned about NAPLAN results, literacy levels, or the curriculum that our children are exposed to? And we should be aware that many of our students might belong to groups that have been victims of moral panics in the media. How do we know that the issue, problem, or phenomenon is disproportional to the threat that it poses? Is it referring to a certain issue as a moral panic, nothing more than a value judgment, an arbitrary claim that it does not deserve to receive as much attention as it has done? Particularly in schools where children are more susceptible to the messages that are being portrayed. Societies around the world have been gripped by moral panic, and yet they have received insufficient attention. Some questions to think about. Are certain individuals susceptible to moral panic? Why do some panics occur among certain areas of the public and not others? Whose interest does the moral panic serve? And how does the media portray these panics, and are they necessary? Looking at implications for the classroom. Media literacy education within the classroom emphasises the acquisition both of cognitive knowledge about how media are produced and distributed, of an analytical skills for interpreting and valuing media content. The Australian curriculum dictates that students should develop abilities to decode, evaluate, understand and analyse messages within a media text of different forms and genres in order to awaken an awareness of social, cultural, political and economic implications of media texts. This appreciation of media should develop an individual's critical thinking, autonomy, which in turn allows students as consumers of media to be aware of how the media can represent issues and position an audience. In addition to increasing the critical literacy of students, awareness of moral panic in the media informs teachers of the possibility that the students themselves may be victims of moral panic.
Politicians of all persuasions use the language of panic and crisis to whip up the fear about quality of teachers and their teaching. The consequence of this deliberate attempt to shape public opinion is the quality has effectively become a smokescreen, obscuring the real and serious educational equity problems we have in Australia. Education is fertile ground for panic, as it proves a massive point of reference for the electorate. Most voters attend school themselves, and a large proportion of the population at any given time has children at school. Attempting to lift teacher quality by mentoring pre-service teachers and ensuring trainee teachers have more practical experience will come to naught unless teacher training institutes are forced to base what they teach on evidence-based research about effective pedagogy and less on postmodern, new age, politically correct theory. Accepted is the claim that the teachers are not effective enough, not literate and numerate enough, not skilled enough, seduced by dubious fads, and entranced by political correctness.
Looking at the facts, the narrowing of the curriculum, viewed by many as a slippery slope, gives new teachers and pre-service teachers less opportunity to pursue and enhance children's development. It is leaving teachers burnt out and dissatisfied with the profession. And one of the direct effects to the moral panic of Australian students' literacy crisis. For us as pre-service teachers, we are going to be subjected to our own testing, having required now to sit a literacy exam before we can work in Australian schools. So that will directly affect both you and I.